Hello. Introduction to Culture Studies. These are the topics that we shall discuss. Theoretical perspectives and other related concepts. So let's start with the definition of culture. Culture is a word that came from Latin word cultura, which actually means cultivation. So at the root, culture is connected to cultivation. Oxford Dictionary would define culture as a way of life, the customs and beliefs, art, way of life, and social organization of a particular country or group. So, group or community, this concept is also important in defining culture. Cambridge Dictionary would define the way of life, especially the general customs and beliefs of a particular group of people at a particular time. So, community and their customs, beliefs, way of life, these two things or aspects would combine into the definition of culture. Change of meanings. You can find the word cultura animi, the phrase first used by Cicero, the Roman philosopher, that means cultivation of the soul. In the medieval France, culture came to mean to protect or honor, something that is related to chivalry. In 18th century Europe, the Enlightenment brought knowledge and intellectual labor into the limelight and established the notion of culture as the improvement of individual's mind through education. So in the 18th century, this culture came into the context of intellectual labor and knowledge. In 19th century, culture was associated with a broader social connotation and was increasingly used to mean the collective beliefs, ideas, and customs of a certain class of people. Culture became associated with notions of taste, refinement, and inheritance, mostly used to refer the habits and customs of upper class society. The taste, the division between people who were perceived to have culture and those who did not have culture. Culture itself became a marker of social distinction. So in the 19th century, we can also associate this concept of culture with Matthew Arnold's high culture and low culture. So culture in 19th century came to be associated with the concept of higher class and taste, the people who have the sense of taste, aesthetic taste or cultural taste, and those people who did not. In 20th century, the term culture has been used by anthropologists and sociologists to encompass the entire range of the modes of thought, action, and communication that human beings use to organize their experiences of living in society. So, the concept of class was dissociated in 20th century. Now the term culture increasingly uh, um, appearing appearing in the context of human behavior, human experiences as a social being. In 1960s and 70s, cultural studies as a part of academia was developed. So in context, cultural studies uh, was something that was a reaction against liberal humanism and orthodox Marxism. Obviously, Matthew Arnold's name would be associated with cultural studies because ultimately he was the one who contextualized the concept of culture in his book Culture and Anarchy, which was published in 1869, where he brought the concept of high culture and popular culture. F.L. Lewis, the great tradition, where he used the terms like elite culture and mass culture. But uh, cultural studies came in academia as a kind of inseparable part of humanities, came with uh, the establishment of Center for Contemporary Cultural Studies under the University of Birmingham in 1964, and the name we should mention is Richard Hoggart. Obviously, Raymond Williams and Stuart Hall, these two people are great scholars of culture studies. Definitions. So once again, we shall come to the definition of culture. So, in general, culture would define um, the customs and beliefs, art, way of life, social organization, a particular country or group. If we separate the concepts like customs and beliefs, art, way of life, social organizations, or of a particular country or group. So many things, many aspects come together. So, first of all, culture would be associated to a group or community um, or of people of a particular country, and it would be correlated to their customs and beliefs, way of life, social organization. So, community and their way of life, once again, their customs, beliefs, traditions, these are associated to culture, the concept of culture. If we try to define in Bengali, then it can be defined in this way: কোনো স্থানের মানুষের আচার-ব্যবহার, জীবিকার উপায়, সঙ্গীত, নৃত্য, সাহিত্য, নাট্যশালা, সামাজিক সম্পর্ক, ধর্মীয় রীতিনীতি, শিক্ষা-দীক্ষা ইত্যাদির মাধ্যমে যে অভিব্যক্তি প্রকাশ করা হয় তাই সংস্কৃতি। কালচার বাংলায় সংস্কৃতি। তো উক্ত বিষয়গুলোকে আবার দুভাগে ভাগ করা যায়। প্রথম ভাগ নিত্যদিনকার জীবনযাপনের সাথে সরাসরি সম্পর্কিত। দ্বিতীয় ভাগ জীবন উপভোগের ব্যবস্থা এবং উপকরণের সাথে সম্পর্কিত। তো অবশ্যই এটা কোনো গোষ্ঠী বা গ্রুপ অফ পিপলের সাথে জড়িত এবং তাদের ধর্মীয় রীতিনীতি, তাদের অভিব্যক্তি, তাদের জীবনযাত্রা, আচার ব্যবহার সব মিলিয়ে একটা গোষ্ঠীর সংস্কৃতি তৈরি হয় বা কালচার তৈরি হয়। এবং এই কৌশলগুলোকে অবশ্যই ভৌগোলিক, সামাজিক, জৈবিক নানা উপায়ে ভাগ করা যায়। Elements of culture: social organization, custom and traditions, religion, arts and literature, forms of government, economic systems. So whatever you can say uh, aspects of daily lives are associated to our social life and our life in general. So so if we try to simplify the concept of culture, that is something that culture can be defined in several ways. First of all, we need to bring into context the concept of group or community while defining culture. So obviously, culture of these people would refer to a certain group of people or a community or a group. So that is very much important. And like and their common beliefs, traditions, and their way of lives, this would become their culture. If we say like Indian culture, then it can be applicable to the entire Indian citizens. If we say Islamic culture, then we are defining this in terms of religion. Then it can be referred to the people who share the common history of Islam, who share this Islam as their religion. So it can be defined in several ways. Dynamic nature of culture. as the components of culture, the elements of culture, like social organization. Think of a group of people. Their the social organization, they share the customs and traditions, religion, arts and literature, forms of government, economic systems, and whatever they experience. These are non-static. These are constantly changing. So in this way, the culture would their culture, the culture of a particular group of people, is always changing with its ever-changing components. So dynamic nature of the term culture. So it depends on the contexts. Performance. Performance is an important aspect of culture because if I say of any Adivasi culture, so culture can be defined or traced when it is performed. If they are following a tradition, if they are following a common tradition, common way of life, uh, their values. So culture can be traced if it is performed. If it is not, then it cannot be traced. Suppose one Indian citizen is living in abroad, suppose in England. If he is practicing Indian culture, then we can say that he is practicing Indian culture. Otherwise, if he is just imbibing English culture, uh, so the Indian culture within his daily life cannot be traced. So culture is something that needs to be performed. Otherwise, it cannot be traced. So culture is also uh, an aspect that would provide the people of of a group or belonging to a community the sense of identity or sense of belonging. So if I say I share uh, Indian culture or Bengali culture, that means that I identify with the people, a group of people who share the common way of life, the common tradition that I share. So that gives me a sense of belonging, a sense of belonging to a group of people. Kroeber and Clark Hahn, they uh, compiled a list of 164 definitions of culture in their book Culture: A Critical Review of Concepts and Definitions. They divided culture in these ways: enumerative, historical, normative, psychological, structural, and genetic. Enumerative definitions focus on the contents of culture, hmm, like the habits, customs, knowledge, of a particular group of people or community. Historical concept of culture would emphasize on the social heritage of tradition. Like if I say that I am a Christian, that means that I share a common history of Christianity with a group of people, with a group of Christians. Normative, this kind of definitions stress on the rules and ways or ideals, values, behavior of a culture. Psychological, emphasize on the adjustment based on needs and emphasize on the learning and or habit. So it's more of a psychological points of view that would define, that would uh, focus culture, that would try to analyze culture on the basis of the psychological um, you see perspectives or psychological corner of the group of people belonging to a particular culture. Particularly the sense of belonging would come into this context also. Structural, the underlying pattern of a culture or cultural traits. Okay, this, so if you consider a group of people having a particular culture, you are trying to uh, disclose the structure lying underneath this culture. The structure would contain its beliefs, moral values, whatever. Generic generic definition of culture would treat culture as an artifact and practiced and passed from generation to generation. So if I say I'm a Bengali, that means that I am inheriting my Bengali culture from my parents, and they inherited from their forefathers. So this is the generic concept of culture. Now, ethnicity and culture, these two concepts are perplexing and often confusing. So, ethnicity, as Oxford Advanced Learner Dictionary would define, the word ethnic means connected with or belonging to a nation, race, people that shares a cultural tradition. Okay, so it is something that is connected with belonging to a nation, race, or people that shares a cultural traditions. So this is connected by similar culture, tradition, traditional language, rituals, habits, religion, race, nationality, even history. Whereas culture would refer to customs, traditions, common beliefs, the ways of living of people, of a space or society. The word culture has a wide range of meaning and is dynamic in nature. The word can be appropriated in very dissimilar contexts. So, what is the basic uh, there are various similarities between these two concepts, but what is something that you can perceive here is that culture is a part of ethnicity. So ethnicity is something is a broader concept, and culture would come into this definition. Culture and Marxist social theory. Now, Marxist philosophy would consider culture as a part of superstructure. So, you know that Marxist philosophy would always try to analyze society in terms of its economical structure, and according to them, the base or base of a society is something that would depend on uh, would depend on relations of productions and means of productions. Means of productions, the machines, factories, lands, and relations of productions uh, like the relations that are based on this means of production, that are related to this means of production, like maybe it can be proletariat, it can be bourgeois, it can be private property, capital, commodities, whatever that is related to this means of production, that is directly related to this means of production, and they would consider culture as a part of superstructure, that is something not directly related to do with the production. So they would define society in two parts, that is base, which is directly related to the production, which is the very important part of a society, and something and those aspects of a society which are not directly linked to this production. So culture would definitely come into the portion of superstructure, which is not exactly uh, related to the production. But later you can see that the culture is also considered to be a means of production. High culture and low culture. Low culture is also called as popular culture, mass culture. These two division, this division is based on aesthetic taste. This is something started with Matthew Arnold, and based on economy and geographical locations, you can divide culture into various in various you can say like divisions: folk culture, urban culture, national culture, subculture. Okay, so types of culture based on taste and social class. Hmm? So high culture. So this is obviously I told you related to Matthew Arnold, particularly his concept that he propounded in Culture and Anarchy, which was published in 1869. So according to Matthew Arnold, culture is the disinterested endeavor after man's perfection, pursued, obtained, and achieved by effort to know the best that has been said and thought in the world. So, culture is something that is related to best that is said and thought in the world. So, in popular usage, high culture identifies the culture of upper class or of a state of a status of a class. So you see what Matthew Arnold tried to define. This concept of culture is particularly related to the concept of taste. So I told you before that in 19th century, the concept culture was looked in this way, like the people who have culture and the people who have not culture. Like it's like the taste, the people who have aesthetic taste and the people uh, who do not have this. So high culture is in popular definitions, in popular usage, it is related to the culture of higher class people. Basically, this was appropriated in 19th century. So Arnold points on high culture are this, like Arnold um, Arnold's arguments are this: on the basis of standards of judgment acquired through formal education that was affordable only to the elite section of society. So why do we say that Arnold's concept of culture, particularly he mentioned the word or phrase high culture, is connected to higher class people? Why? Because he was talking about standards of judgment which could be acquired only through formal education, and this formal education was not accessible to everybody. It was like it was accessible mostly to the higher class people. And Arnold excluded a large number of cultural objects and practices. He was only talking about aesthetics, and this is something like the aesthetics is a luxury for poor people. So it's something that is not directly connected to the people living below poverty line, or uh, people facing financial crisis. So he was talking about aesthetic taste, and this aesthetic taste was mostly associated with the high culture, or rather higher class. So Matthew Arnold also disregarded the tastes of the working classes as invalid criteria for defining the accessing and or assessing culture. So he disregarded the common masses' taste, their interests. So their interests for the kind of theater, the kind of books are not of that, or not of that. Something you can say have aesthetic taste that cannot be linked to uh, judgment of qualitative aesthetic taste, you can say. So that's why Matthew Arnold's concept of high culture is related to higher class people. First of all, it was accessible only through knowledge and formal education, which was accessible to the higher class people only during 19th century England, particularly. And then he excluded a large number of cultural objects and practices, and then he considered the interest of the common mass as something that were negligible. So low culture. Why the term low culture appeared? So obviously it's a kind of antonym for high culture. And interestingly, this low culture is also popular culture. The alternative name for this low culture is popular culture. That means that a large section of people's culture are considered as low culture. So, why? What is the definition of low culture or popular culture or mass culture? The forms of popular culture that have mass appeal. That have mass appeal means it it is something that is associated with a large number of people. Hmm? In his book Popular Culture and High Culture, Herbert J. Gans gives a definition of how to identify and create low culture, quote unquote low culture. Aesthetic standards of low culture stress substance from form being totally subservient. There is no explicit concern with abstract ideas, even with fictional forms of contemporary social problems and issues. Low culture emphasizes morality but limits itself to familiar and individual problems and values which apply to such problems. Low culture is content to depict traditional working class values winning out over the temptation to give into the conflicting impulses and behavior patterns. Okay, so his point of view is clear. That is something, low culture or popular culture is something that is no explicit concern with abstract ideas. So you cannot find abstract ideas or creative ideas, the you can the dominance of creative ideas. This low culture would lack this abstract or creative ideas. This low culture or popular culture would depict morality, obviously, but those are quite limited, and these moral values are quite commonplace. And low culture is content to depict traditional working class values. So the low culture would always target the products of low culture would always target the working class people who are living below below poverty line or middle or lower class, you can say. So low culture is concerned of this middle and lower class people, and this would mostly focus on the working class people. So now the concept is clear, more or less, that this is something, uh, popular culture, or sometimes called as low culture or mass culture, is something that is associated with the common mass or working class people, the lower class and middle class people. So the types of culture based on economy and geographical locations. Folk culture, you are familiar with this term. Folk culture refers to a culture traditionally practiced by a small homogeneous rural group living in relative isolation from other groups. So we know usually what we define as folks, particularly as Indians. Uh, for example, we refer to Adivasis as folk, like, so their culture is folk culture. But in general, folk culture would refer to the culture of a group of people who are generally isolated from the common mass. Specific forms of culture, such as rituals relating to sowing of seeds and harvesting crops in agrarian societies, were restricted to a relatively smaller community of people inhabiting a common geographical area. So, this is quite understandable. Often we consider the rituals and their these people's rituals and their um, traditions as folk traditions and folk rituals. So, urban culture, we all know that we usually define people by his or her urban relation or rural connection. So, urban culture is something that is any behavioral patterns of the various types of cities and urban areas, both past and present. So, this urban culture is somehow related to the people belonging to um, um, uh, some more or less born and brought up in urban areas. The common behavioral patterns that are believed to exist among these people living in urban areas. And what is national culture? So, uh, national culture would refer to a set of norms, behaviors, beliefs, customs, and values shared by the population of a sovereign nation. Also refers to specific characteristics such as language, religion, ethnic, racial identity, cultural history, and traditions. A distinctive set of habits, values, assumptions generally held by the members of a national group. So, usually, a culture would always refer to a group, the concept of group, and their customs, beliefs, language, whatever. So, a nation can have a distinct culture. A nation can have a distinct culture. Actually, Benedict Anderson called nation, the concept of nation, as imagined community, because the people of even a smallest nation would never know each other, every one of them, but still they believe they are bound by the concept of nation. They share a common nation. This is something like that. The people belonging to a nation would believe that they share a common culture. This commonality can be based on religion, can be based on language, can be based on nation even. So subculture. Subculture is something that is, you can say, like culture within culture, and often this subculture, this smaller culture living in a broader cultural praxis would uh, would attribute a sort of, would possess a sort of countercultural attitude, like the behavior and beliefs of a particular group of people in society that are different from the most people. This is not the exact definition, I can say. The way of life, customs, beliefs, ideas of a particular group of people within a society that are different from the rest of the society. This is definition is by Cambridge Dictionary, but subculture would basically refer to the would refer to the condition when a group of people having a distinct culture, or something like, you can say, culture within a culture. So culture within a culture, subculture is culture within a culture, and this culture of a group of people would have a kind of uh, counter uh, is kind of, counterpointing attitude. Okay, so you can say like that is something, a countercultural movements. These are called as subcultures. For example, youth subculture, the gay subculture. You see, it is quite understandable that gay subculture is something that culture within culture, and then it would this gay subculture would challenge or counterpoint the heteronormativity of a culture, which is quite common. The criminal culture, again, a culture within a culture, and this is something that is not similar, that is dissimilar to the mainstream culture, and this is something uh, in conflict with, actually in conflict with the mainstream culture. Okay, so question of representation, culture needs to be practiced, otherwise it cannot be traced. It is something that I have already discussed. Cultural identity, culture would provide identity to individuals, the sense of belonging to a community, like the concept of ethnicity, like the concept of nation. Hmm? So these are the references.